we are here having a conversation about generative AI and how concerns about generative AI when being used for student work in ways that are not supported by faculty members, either via policies that have been established by that faculty member in that class. So these could be kind of course-wide bans against generative AI use, or in the case of potentially just not letting Gen AI be used for specific assignments, if there are concerns that perhaps one of our MSU Denver students have not followed that ban, and there are concerns that perhaps they have been used using generative AI. Before we jump into kind of talking and discussing talking through these specific scenarios, I think it would be important for each of us to introduce ourselves for our faculty members and our staff members and our students who might be kind of watching us as we through these often complex situations. And so I'll kick things off and then we'll kind of pass it off. I'm Dr. Samuel Jay. I am the Executive Director of Emerging Technologies and Academic Transformation, as well as the Director of Faculty Affairs. And I'm a longtime faculty member here at MSU Denver. And with that, Taylor, the floor is yours.
Absolutely. Hello, all. My name is Taylor Tackett. I'm the Associate Vice President in Student Affairs and Dean of Students. And one of the areas that I get to support is the student conduct process on the campus. So I'll pass it over to Jeff.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jeff Loats. I'm the Executive Director for the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Design at MSU Denver. I'm former physics faculty and still teach a physics course every now and then. And certainly I've had a lot of conversations with faculty about generative AI, and the folks in the CTLD have been thinking hard about it for, I guess, a year and a half now. And off to Shaun.
Hi, everyone. I'm Shaun Schafer. I'm the Associate Vice President of Curriculum, Academic Effectiveness, and Policy Development. Like Jeff and Sam, I also have a long time career teaching here. I continue to teach a class a semester in journalism. I also, because of the academic effectiveness part of my job, have an invested interest in how we are assessing student learning, which is what brought me to generative AI in the first place, with this terrible question of knowing that machines can now do some of the work that we've always counted on students to do, how are we going to assess their learning? And so that's kind of what initially engaged me in generative AI and really has brought forth to me the importance of the policies that we develop and the procedures that we take to ensure the integrity of our academic endeavor.
Fantastic. So kind of what we are hoping to do here for everybody is to show an example or examples of the hand in glove collaboration or partnership that student affairs and academic affairs has when it comes to these situations. Obviously, we partner on many other things, but when it comes to addressing concerns about unwarranted or disallowed generative AI use, this is something that I think we're all in agreement has to be a collaboration between the faculty member, their chair, perhaps there might be situations where a dean is involved, but our friends over in the Dean of Students office, including Taylor and his team. And so with that, I think let's walk ourselves through a few example scenarios that perhaps might come across the desks of those who have to make some tough calls come this upcoming semester. So the first one is unauthorized AI use in a writing assignment. A student submits an essay and the instructor suspects that portions of the essay were generated by AI, as the writing style is inconsistent with the student's previous work. So the first question is going to be for you, Dr. Schafer. How would you, as an instructor, approach the student with your concerns, excuse me?
Well, the starting point actually is before we ever had the semester begin is, did you, as an instructor, include in your syllabus some guidance on exactly what generative AI would be allowed or not allowed in your course? And if you have it on an assignment by assignment basis, where does this assignment fit in it? So that has to be my immediate starting point. This question is really, I think, most pertinent for a lot of us who teach in a discipline that rely on a lot of writing, but we don't necessarily teach writing. And so we really have to look at, do I know enough about this student's work that I can look at it with some confidence and say, yeah, this is a significant departure from what you've done, or does this look like the work that is the somewhat overwritten and clumsiness of somebody who's trying to learn the subject? And so that's where I start is, did I make ground rules? Were my ground rules clear? And if I don't feel good about that, that's probably where I have to come have a new discussion with my community of learners to go, okay, I have clearly not done this very well because I have suspicions about what's being done and what's being used, and I kind of need to have a more effective way of guiding you in the right direction. If I have done all those things, then I have to start going, okay, knowing that I'm going to get a 1 to 2% false positive rate on any tool I use to look at what they've done and to check their work for AI. That is not going to be, this is not my great defense that I can use to say, okay, yes, and this is definitively it. I think it's like you often see with any suspicion you have of an academic misconduct moment. The best thing you can possibly do is talk to the student in the least combative fashion possible before you go down the track of, I'm accusing you of violating academic integrity rules. So that's where I start.
Jeff, let me ask you real quick, Dr. Loats. What might you add in terms of what our faculty and our staff and our students should be aware of when it comes to these plagiarism or generative AI detectors? I'm talking not necessarily just about the ones that we have access to within our LMS system, but others that might be used to review and assess whether or not generative AI has been used for student work.
So I think despite some of the promises that we get from companies who are vested in selling the software, the success rate for these tools is just really, really low. And so even some of the companies like OpenAI, who have, I think it can be said, rushed to produce their core large language models and shoved them out the door and pushed them around the world, they originally had an AI detection tool that they took off the market because it just wasn't reliable. So the careful research on these things is of course, maybe a year old at most. That's the oldest possible research there is, but 1% error rate is probably optimistic. There's also a really clear bias toward detecting non-native English speakers and accusing them of being AI generated. So part of what we got to be really careful about is being sure that the tool we're using is not treated as fact. And so I would bring a lot of caution to using those tools pretty much at all. I think the instructor's intuition, especially by comparing it to previous student submission, is going to be more reliable. But we know that some faculty are going to use those tools on occasion, mostly like maybe sometimes just out of curiosity. What would a detector say about this? And then sometimes just because having a number in front of you makes you feel confident. So if I plug a piece of text into a detector and it says 80% chance that this is generative AI, that can feel really definitive to a faculty member and feel like an open and shut case. So I think that all of us in the academic community really have to keep coming back to the idea that those are not factual numbers. Those are not concrete as much as they might sound that way. And that we have to think about a conversation with our students. We have to have a conversation with our student affairs colleagues to make sure that we're following a good process. And we have to be ready to be aware of what really is and isn't possible in the generative AI landscape.
Thank you very much, Dr. Loats. Dr. Tackett, what might you sprinkle in there from a student affairs perspective that you think not just students should be aware of before even thinking about using these tools? Obviously, this is a specific scenario, but also what would you like our faculty members to really take into consideration to think ahead should a scenario like this come about?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to emphasize, that folks in the Dean of Students office can be really strong partners here, and that can look a couple of different ways, right? You can give us a call, you can bounce ideas off of us as you're sort of navigating or looking at the students' materials to understand if you think that there's some academic misconduct element to the conversation. But I do want to emphasize that it's really important for all faculty to know that you do have academic freedom. So when it comes to your classroom and the assignments or the grade for the course, you have the capacity to grade as you see fit based on whatever is in your syllabus or the faculty handbook that you can really pull into this conversation. We really try to center in the Dean of Students office when we're navigating this with students as an educational process. So what I'll share is academic misconduct is the #1 policy violation at this institution, usually between 1 and 200 cases per year. I also think we're probably potentially underreporting, right? So making sure that folks understand what happens when that comes over to us. We want to be good partners with you, and we'll involve you in that process. We're really trying to not make it punitive focused. We really want it to be centered around education. And so the conversations we're really having with students are about building the skill set so that it doesn't happen again. When we look at the data, we can see that it appears, based on the information that we receive from faculty members, that Many of the times that we receive these reports, students just don't know how to properly cite sources correctly. They're not necessarily pulling in generative AI to be malicious or to submit materials that, they're trying to pass off as their own in a really negative way. Oftentimes, they're trying to utilize tools that their peers are using, that they're excited to use. And so really, it's about resetting expectations with them and then helping them get the education that they need to understand how the process works. And the last thing I'll say too is, in our world, I know that there's some concern about students having records around these items as well. So one of the things is, when faculty report to us, we're sort of the repository for all of this information. So we can see patterns of behaviors over time, which is really helpful when we're trying to have conversations with students. If it's happening in multiple places, in multiple colleges, that's a really powerful way for us to have a conversation. And that leads us to the final thing, which is the student conduct process is a progressive discipline process. So when we think about outcomes, we're really talking about the education first, and then it really goes up from there, starting with warnings, educational materials to probation. And if the sort of scope of the incident is large enough, students could be at risk for suspension or expulsion, but that is very rare.
Thank you. One thing I will add to this is that as a faculty member, if you are concerned about kind of setting the table for student usage, I would really encourage you to look at some of the resources that we have available for students about the ethical use of generative AI. Those are available on our AI for All site, but on there is a very clear decision map that is designed specifically for students to help them figure out whether or not generative AI is going to be allowed for a given assignment if there are concerns. But ultimately, I think what all three of you really touched upon here is that is a conversation. If you as a student are concerned about it, you should be having with your faculty member. And as a faculty member, there's a bit of an obligation to make that very clear, at least at the very beginning of class, exactly what the expectations are when it comes to generative AI use. So thank you very much, gentlemen. My second question is going to be related to group projects, right? So a little bit more complex here, and perhaps Taylor will kind of get your addition to how you might handle a group project situation from the dean's office. But I want to ask Shaun first. Let's say we have a group project, 4 or 5 students. One of those students clearly used generative AI to participate in it, but the other 3 or 4 did not. What is the approach that a faculty member might have when it comes to potentially Gen AI created content in a group project by one person, but not everyone?
We're going to have to really start off with the communication piece again. Like, what was allowed, what was going to be acceptable on this group project? Is that okay? Because you can't go with an underlying assumption that is wrong. If it was allowed, somebody should be encouraged to use it. I think is tough among your peers sometimes to make that because nobody wants to be the person who comes out and is accusing somebody of using generative AI. But if as a group you're sitting there and you're worried that everything that student Shaun Schafer turned in looks like it was probably using generative AI, then it's probably a good starting point to go, okay, if that's not okay, we need to be talking to both this student and to our instructor about, how do we proceed with this? Has this, spoiled the work we're doing on this project? And then kind of we have to think about as instructors, how do we deal with something like that? Because if this was an area where it was either forbidden within our class in total, or this was something that you couldn't do on that particular assignment, what do you think is the kind of proper steps there? I mean, did you include any instruction that's like, if you do this, the following will be considered, or have you just made it, a banner across that, okay, and off I go, and I will go have you visit with Taylor Tackett and his group in the Dean of Students office? Where did you put it out? So kind of what sort of ground rules did you lay down? Follow those. If you have laid down no ground rules, again, you're in a situation where you're going to have to really kind of look at, okay, how do I go back to this community to give it a better definition of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, and kind of how your actions will affect the perception of the academic integrity of the work you're doing. And so that's where I would start.
Jeff, in line with this particular scenario, what are the kinds of adjustments or changes that a faculty member might make to their grading rubric that may not say, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much Gen AI was used, right, and grade them by that, but what are the kind of measurements that we might think about adding to our different kinds of rubrics that would basically, I don't want to say ding, right, but highlight the fact that this doesn't seem like natural kind of human language, or it's not getting to the kind of the heart of a student's real potential. What are some of the things that you are learning or researching on that might shed some light on this particular area?
I mean, I think right now, if you are exposed to the tools, you will start to pick up an intuition for when you can sort of tell that it's been generative AI. But I don't expect that to last, right? One of the things that I think we're going to see is that 2 years from now, the things that currently make me go, huh, was that generative AI, are probably going to go away. And so I think long term, the particular items in the rubric may or may not be available to us. And I think the tools we want to use are different. So let me avoid your question in 2 ways. One way is to say, we've always struggled with group work with what about that one student who didn't do it or phoned it in or copied and pasted from Wikipedia, right? So there's parts of this that aren't new, and we have lots of good understanding about how to handle those things. And the main thing is that they require time and collaborative communication with our students. So for example, before this project or before the first group project, maybe a small one, you have a classroom-wide discussion about what's our policy about generative AI. What's your group? Maybe group by group. How does this group want to do it? And then the instructor can decide whether or not they accept the group's policy about how the group is going to use generative AI or not. Right? Having an internal group peer agreement is a really strong way to say for the faculty member to come back and say, look, your group said this wasn't okay, and that's what I'm going to lean on as I talk about this with you. So that's one of the methods. Of the methods that we can use to come into this. And then the other strong one is we are almost always looking for process. When we're trying to get student writing, what we're after is process. And so drafts, steps along the way. And I don't really mean like at the end, turn in a first draft, a second draft, and a final draft, but really having there be check-ins along the way where early on, there's just no penalty for using your own writing. You have enough time to complete it, maybe in class time. You have enough leeway to write imperfectly and to be messy in your writing so that you can really show students that what you're after here is a process, not a product. And then you can step them from there toward a final product that then you have some history on and you can show, and the group can demonstrate to itself and to you that they didn't violate those expectations. And if someone did, you have a clearer track record of how it came about.
I really like that, by the way. I think that, if anything, this is really forcing us as pedagogues to understand the importance of the process when it comes to learning. And generative AI doesn't necessarily stand in the way of that process. In fact, from my vantage point, it can often augment it. But I really like your point there, where there's a development of a learner over the course of a course that when done appropriately and correctly, generative AI is not necessarily going to impact, but can, if done correctly, really support it. So thank you for that. Taylor, I want to throw you a tough question, right? Let's say it's very clear that student from scenario 1 or student from scenario 2 did use generative AI. There's no doubt about it. What happens?
Yes, thank you, Sam. So I think the most important first step is the incident report that you submit to the Dean of Students office. So that's an online form on our website, the Dean of Students page here at MSU Denver. Fill that out. Give us as much substantive detail as you know, because if you're a faculty member leading a class, you're the subject matter expert. And it's really helpful when we understand the nuances of what you're seeing so that we can investigate, essentially. And so in this particular situation, I could see 2 pathways forward. I could see a faculty member where maybe there's a subsection or portion of the class that they suspect has, plagiarized part of their work. You can literally submit an incident report to our office and just request that we facilitate the investigation. So you don't have to feel like you have to do that. And we'll meet with all of the witnesses and all the folks involved, including you as the faculty member as a witness. And then we will move through the process and make a determination about policy violation. You will still have the capacity to make an assessment of the grade or on the assignment or for the course. So that's option 1. Option 2 is if really your concern is less about the academic misconduct the academic misconduct that's happening, and maybe it's more about the conflict that you're seeing in and amongst the group. We also have restorative justice and conflict resolution in the Dean of Students office. So if folks are really looking for not conduct violations to address, but conflict management, we also have folks who are trained in that and they can help lead circles to help resolve conflict in the classroom as well.
Jeff, did you have something to add to what Taylor just said?
Yeah. I mean, one of the pieces that I love about the conflict resolution piece is that I think for many instructors, and I've experienced this, I've had both reactions to this. Sometimes it feels so personal. It feels like a student has done something to me when they submit a copy and pasted piece from Wikipedia or when they use generative AI. And there's an aspect of what's happening here that is, if I were coaching a faculty member, is about processing our own emotions and trying to see if we can separate a bit from the feeling that it's a personal attack. And especially if it's a situation where we weren't actually very clear about what the boundaries of an assignment are, that can leave us really frustrated because it feels like this was a personal harm that was done to us, or maybe that they did to their classmates, or it can feel really about like what's right. And at the same time, it maybe wasn't clear in the instructions that this was or wasn't allowed. So that piece feels super important. The piece I was going to follow up with you, Taylor, is what do you say? I suspect you've been asked this in the last year. What is MSU Denver's policy on generative AI? How do you respond to that when a faculty member is bringing it to you very much in the lens of is it allowed or not?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the Student Code of Conduct, we do delineate policy very clearly by different types of academic misconduct or academic integrity concerns. And so what I would offer as a faculty member, if they're reviewing and they're like, wow, there's no generative AI policy, look at what the actual behavior was. Was the student adopting work and submitting it that was not their own? That might fall under the definition of plagiarism. And so that's how we will do our analysis under the current academic misconduct policy. And so, there's potentially a pathway forward. So that's a great option. Just pick up the phone and say, hey, this is the behavior I'm observing or I believe is happening. Can you just walk me through, where you think there might be a policy violation and how I might address this? And we'd be happy to talk you through all of that.
Awesome. Not to keep picking on Dr. Schafer here, but I'm going to because it's easy. I am Shaun because of your home department being journalism and media production, and much of the work that's being done there when it comes to copyright and copyright infringement. What happens? What do we do as a faculty member if we have students who are generating visual content, and some of that visual content has clearly kind of broken copyright rules? How, as a faculty member, if I'm in art or communication design or journalism, or really any area, right? It could be marketing. What is the best approach for having that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a pretty tough one, and it's exciting when you get that because, I mean, we still have copyright considerations related to generative AI that are working their way through the courts right now. You have people like Reuters and the Associated Press who have sued a number of our AI generators, the Chat GPTs of the world, saying, you took copyright material and you used this to build your model, and you did not give us any compensation for our copyright work. So we are in that exciting period where we know the courts are going to come down and give us some direction on this, but they have yet to do so. And so that makes it trickier on the legal piece. And I mean, we have already seen, what happens when you steal copyright material in every other format we've ever had in our past. But it does get interesting here because, especially when you talk about the visual reproduction piece of it, is it doesn't take much to take something from, oh, I know exactly what that copyright image looks like, to, oh no, I have now used generative AI and I have created something new. This is a different form of this artwork. And so I would love to tell you, Sam J, that I can go, yes, and here's the definitive statement on what you need to do in every one of these cases. I don't have that yet. I don't have the guidance from the courts, and I do have the possibility of I can sit there and if I make slight variations on a work, I have created something new as my defense. And so it does get into a really interesting case of, because you've really gone beyond what our past considerations of things like fair use were. And we are at this moment of, okay, what is legitimate, what is illegitimate on that? I think what really comes down to a lot of it is when you're presenting something as this is my own work, as Taylor was just talking about, it's like, is it truly your own work? And that's where that question really does arise. I think it's been really interesting to watch our folks in the visual arts and how they have said, hey, generative AI is an amazing tool. We can use it to play with and do these following other things, and you can come up with something out of this that did not previously exist, which is a pretty cool deal. But again, if you're in a position where it's like, okay, you have done this piece of artwork, you've created this piece of writing, and you're presenting as your own, and it is not, then I think we're right back to our considerations about integrity and where do we want to go from there.
Taylor, let's say in this particular example that the students are actually encouraged to use generative AI. And, in talking to some of our art professors, those are the kind of assignments that they're going to be asking their students to experiment with, right? I mean, this is kind of a new tool, a new platform, in the same way we might think about Canvas or something like that, not the LMS, the actual material. What are the things, Taylor, that you would suggest faculty members kind of consider when they're having these kind of conversations to address what Shaun just talked about? It's not, breaking course code necessarily, but it's breaking a law, not on purpose. How do we approach that?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of funny. Right now, our current policy requires that we submit any of these academic misconduct cases over to the Dean of Students office. And I just want to emphasize, we're really trying to center that educational conversation. And so I think really just entering that conversation, seeking to learn and understand how the student interpreted the syllabus, for instance, kind of bringing back to that earlier, it's really important to have very clear guidance as best you can, because if there is an absence of policy in our office, we're really going to lean on your direction to the course and what that looked like. And of course, as we have conversations with you, if we get to a place where maybe the guidance wasn't clear, or maybe there is a gap that we find later down the road, I think that that's where we can really work with you to make the experience meaningful and educational for the student, but not necessarily having a policy violation attached to it.
All right. Basic question related to allowed usage of generative AI in a class, creating some written content. Professors have structured it and said, this is fine, use it, do all this stuff, but the student fails to cite. I don't want to talk necessarily about how do we ping the student or what do we do with Dean of Students office, but what should we know as a student, as a faculty member, when it comes to correctly citing the use of generative AI for what we produce?
I mean, so I think that the various citation authorities, I think of things like the American Psychological Association and MLA, I think also has it, have come out with pretty simple ways of citing it. My general preference to members is to say something along the lines of, give your students the reasons why citations are important, and then worry less about the exact method. So if a student says, hey, I used this website with this prompt, that's probably plenty, unless there's a circumstance where the profession, this is a sort of higher level or a deeper professional course where part of your goal is you must cite in specific ways to meet what is considered a rigorous criteria inside that field, right? So that's the line I would draw for any citations. Is informal citation work, I think, can be perfectly functional for a lot of courses. And then the more formalized, really specific methods and formats are important inside specific disciplines. So that would be my general push.
That's a good push. That's a good push. I like it. As we wrap some things up here, I just wanted to highlight a couple of items, and I want to throw it back to you three for some closing remarks. But I've been encouraging our faculty and our students to lean on the Adobe Suite as a tool for visual creation. Reason being, Adobe is a kind of trusted creative resource and has obviously been a leader in that marketplace for many, many years. And so when generative AI really became all the craze, I think it's more than a craze now, right? It's our reality. They've been at the forefront of it, really establishing kind of clear copyright guidelines. And then when it comes to general kind of AI chatbot usage, if you have any concerns, but you know that you want to get involved and try to mess around with stuff, Copilot is really the default that I encourage folks to use. That is something that is falls within our Microsoft user agreement as MSU Denver faculty, staff, and students. And so if you're trying to get in there and experiment, Copilot is definitely the place to go to. So with that, I suppose I would like to see if all of you had one or two kind of closing recommendations, pieces of advice that you would add, that you would provide to a faculty member, to the instructor, as well as to the student. do's, don'ts, think, general thoughts about generative AI use, positions to take, perspectives to enrich. Taylor, let me throw it over to you. Something for a faculty member and something for a student.
Yeah, I mean, I would start for faculty. Please know that our office is here to support you, and you don't have to feel like you have to navigate this alone. So even if you just suspected a little bit and you want to generate a conversation with us without submitting an incident report, we're going to be here and available to do that with you whenever you need. So feel free to just give us a call. And in terms of students, I think really leaning in and asking questions about how to navigate research at an institutional level and link into the resources that exist between our library, your academic faculty, your English 1010 and 1020 classes, and then of course what we do out of the Dean of Students office as well.
Dr. Loats.
So for faculty, I think I want to direct our attention to the idea that our adult learners, which is especially at MSU Denver, really the bulk of our students. I mean, I think even the students that are straight out of high school are technically adults, right? The adult students really benefit from a lot of autonomy and choice. And so if we can put some of these questions in front of our students, I think you'll see both a larger uptake in them choosing the behaviors that we want. So if we say, in this group, your group should decide amongst themselves how generative AI is or isn't to be used, I think we will find that those groups make choices that we'll be pretty happy with and that we feel much more comfortable enforcing because they are less arbitrary coming from the instructor. From the student side of things, maybe my top piece of advice would be to say something like, if you are coming into this college class, one class or the whole experience as a hoop to jump through, a box checking exercise, I just need to get through this so I can get my diploma. There's a lot of parts of the academic game that are going to be uncomfortable and frustrating, and especially the interaction that you have with faculty can be weird and off-putting. And a lot of faculty, what they really want to do is they want to help you learn these things and share the excitement that they bring to it. So one of the ways that we can all get out of the trap of is generative AI okay or not is about, well, what are we all trying to do? If a student is using generative AI to try and learn the things that I want them to learn in this class, I'm pretty sure we're going to be happy about it if we have a conversation.
Right.
It's when a student is using generative AI because they don't feel like this is a genuinely useful experience and they just want to get through it, well, then I have some responsibility to get them on board and convince them that that's not a great way to spend their time or their money, frankly. And the student has some responsibility to sort of meet me there and have a conversation so that we can figure out what the right way forward is.
Thank you. Dr. Schafer.
For faculty members, I would start with be clear. I think that's the most important thing. What you want, make it clear to your students. Don't ever be vague on this. Make sure, and I would agree with my colleagues that one of the best ways is in building your community of learners is kind of a negotiated process of what is appropriate. I realize there will be some people in some disciplines that will shriek and run from the room in hearing that, but I do really think that is an important component of arriving at what are your rules and make them clear for everybody. So that's what I would really want from faculty members more than anything else is just provide clarity to your students. That's the best benefit you can give them. As a student, one of the things that I would really be thinking about is the fact that using generative AI is an enormous energy suck. The generative AI tools are incredibly high energy users. And so when I really think about the sustainability of that, it is something that I do kind of wonder and worry about myself is I do realize it's a tool, but it's a tool that requires a lot of juice to make it go. And so I would have to say that I'd always probably be hedging in my most altruistic sense, using generative AI a great deal. But as a student, if I have any doubts about its use, please check with your instructors. If nothing else, this is part of how you build a relationship with instructors, which is what's going to help strengthen your bonds to the institution, which also is going to increase the odds that you're going to successfully matriculate. And so that's a winner for everybody. So don't be afraid to ask questions.
I'm going to close just by saying I think faculty and students, teachers and learners are in the same boat in ways that not everybody recognizes when it comes to this particular thing. Sure, there are those outliers who are all in and gung-ho and they've been using it from day one, but the vast majority of that middle is pretty, I don't want to say ignorant, but unpracticed when it comes to this stuff. And so being able as a faculty member to learn how to use this stuff in unison with your students can be a really, really powerful experience. I think that as Shaun mentioned, we don't want to kind of use it for everything because it is a juice suck. It is not necessarily environmentally conscious industry. But when you are using it thoughtfully, it can really augment the work that you're doing. And I want to kind of leave with this closing remark before we sign off. If we understand generative AI to be not a flash in the pan or some sort of technology that will go in and out of kind of vogue or popularity as we move through time, and rather something that we can kind of see as a central part of our experience as human beings in the same way that we might call the internet. From my vantage point, there is no better person to teach a student how to use this stuff, if you so choose, than a faculty member. We are the ones with the disciplinary knowledge. We are the ones that can teach a student how to use this well. Because honestly, Jeff and I have had this discussion, and Shaun and I have had this discussion on academic affairs side of conversations. It's these tools are more valuable the better your already existing expertise is. I can ask it a lot of questions about physics, or I can ask it a lot of questions about journalism, or I could ask it a lot of questions about higher ed administration. I am not going to be able to get the same outputs, the same results, the same enriching responses that my other three colleagues are going to get. Just in the same way they would not get that same if they asked it about Aristotelian rhetoric. It's just not going to happen. And so it's a learning experience, it's a process, to go back to what Jeff said. But I think knowing that all of us are on this journey together and that we're all trying to figure it out in the same way that 98% of the population is trying to figure out, it's probably 99.9, quite honestly. It'll lead a little bit more comforting, I think. So gentlemen, thank you so much for having this conversation. And I think we're all having an open door policy in terms of conversations about this, but I appreciate it. And best of luck as you get ready and continue throughout the academic year.